Chapter 1. Arrival at Santa Legubra. Laura was a photographer and had heard rumors of an abandoned village called Santa Legubra, hidden in a remote mountainous area. According to legends, the village had been abandoned decades ago, and no one in the region could give an exact reason. Intrigued by the mystery, she decided it would be a perfect place to capture on her camera. When she arrived, the silence was overwhelming. Houses lined both sides of the single, dusty, narrow street, framed by dark windows and crumbling doors. The feeling of loneliness was almost tangible. As she explored, Laura felt the village watching her, as if each shadow hid an ancient secret waiting to be discovered. Chapter 2. The mystery of the portraits. Entering one of the houses, Laura noticed something peculiar. Each home had a portrait on the wall, always of a family. All the portraits shared a strange, somber expression, as if the people in them had known something terrible that they could never forget. One of the portraits showed a family of 5 people, a man, a woman, and 3 children. The eyes of each member seemed empty, but at the same time, they followed Laura no matter where she moved. She felt a chill, and her impulse was to leave the house. However, a part of her wanted to know more about that family and the fate of the people of the town. Chapter 3. The abandoned church. The largest building in the center of the town was an old church with a large rusty iron cross on top. She decided to go inside and explore, hoping to find some clue about what had happened in Santa Legubra. Inside the church, she discovered a dusty altar, and behind it an old book covered in dust. The pages were deteriorated, but on several of them a name could be read: Montenegro family. According to the book, the Montenegro family had been one of the first to inhabit the village, and curiously, the records mentioned that they had offered their loyalty to the village and made sacrifices in the name of Saint Legubre's protection. Every time Laura turned a page, she felt a pressure on her chest, as if something was oppressing her. When she reached the last page, she found a sentence written in red ink: "Only those who discover our secret will be able to leave us." Suddenly, a dull sound coming from the back pews of the church made her turn around. She swore she saw a shadow move between the rows of seats. Chapter 4. Shadows in the cemetery. Laura hurried out of the church, trying to calm the fear that was overwhelming her. She decided to head to the cemetery in search of the Montenegro family grave. When she arrived, she found a row of tombstones covered in moss and almost illegible, but one of them had the surname Montenegro clearly engraved on it. As she bent down to look closely at the tombstone, Laura noticed that it was surrounded by several small crosses. It was then that she felt that she was not alone. Looking sideways, she made out a dark figure a few meters away from her, barely visible in the twilight light. The figure watched her with eyes that looked like dark wells, and before she could react, it disappeared among the graves. Laura felt paralyzed, and a feeling of hopelessness began to envelop her. Chapter 5. The vision at the end. As the sun began to set, Laura took refuge in an old inn that she had seen when she arrived. The place was in ruins, but there was a worn armchair where she decided to sit down to rest. As she looked through the photos on her camera, she noticed something disturbing. In every picture she had taken, shadows appeared that she did not remember having seen. Suddenly, the room began to fill with a whisper that seemed to come from all directions. Looking up, she saw several figures standing silently, watching her from the dark corners of the inn. Their faces were the same ones she had seen in the portraits of the abandoned houses. Laura was left breathless, not knowing if this was real or an illusion caused by tiredness. Chapter 6. The Girl's Diary. At dawn, Laura worked up the courage to explore one of the large houses at the end of the town, which seemed to be better preserved. There she found a small diary covered in dust in a child's room. Opening it, she read that it belonged to a girl named Isabel Montenegro, the youngest daughter of the family in the portrait. The diary contained childhood stories about games and tales the girl shared with her siblings, but toward the end, the tales turned dark. Isabel wrote about rituals at the church and how her family said it was necessary to pacify the shadows to keep the village safe. On the last page, Isabel mentioned seeing her mother and other villagers gathered in the church at midnight, surrounded by dark figures. Chapter 7. The Midnight Ritual. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Laura waited for midnight and headed back to the church. Upon entering, she felt a cold, heavy atmosphere, as if hundreds of invisible eyes were watching her. She hid behind one of the pews, hoping to see something, and that was when the figure of a woman in a long black dress appeared. The woman began to whisper a kind of prayer, calling upon the shadows of the town. Soon, other figures joined her, forming a circle around the altar. The shadows lengthened and seemed to come to life, surrounding Laura, who could not take her eyes off what was happening. She understood that this was the same ritual that Isabel Montenegro had described in her diary. Chapter 8. The Revelation of the Shadows. Suddenly, the shadows approached Laura, and a deep voice echoed in her mind. "Why have you come here, stranger?" It was as if the town itself was speaking to her, judging her presence and her curiosity. Trying to explain herself, Laura muttered that she only wanted to know what had happened in St. Lugubre. The voice answered her, "This place is not for the living. Only those who belong to the town can understand our secrets." The shadows began to surround her more and more closely, and Laura felt her body weaken. Chapter 9. The Failed Escape. Terrified, Laura ran out of the church, not knowing if the shadows were following her or if it had all been an illusion. She ran without stopping until the edge of the town, but, strangely, she always ended up back in the central square. Every path she tried brought her back to the same point. She understood then that St. Lugubre would not let her go so easily. She decided to return to the church, hoping that Isabel's book or diary would give her a clue to leave. However, upon arriving, she discovered that the book had disappeared, and in its place only a portrait of herself remained, hanging on one of the church walls. Chapter 10. The New Portrait. Desperate, Laura looked at the portrait. It was an image of her with an empty and gloomy expression, just like the families she had seen before. She felt an inexplicable chill running through her body, and at that moment she heard the same whispers that had tormented her since her arrival. Looking at her reflection in a window, she saw that her face seemed to fade, taking on the same spectral appearance as the townspeople. The deep voice echoed in her mind again. St. Gloomy always claims those who seek the forbidden. As her image faded, Laura had one last thought. Would someone else discover St. Gloomy's secret and become trapped in this strange town? Or worse, who would be the next to see her portrait in this cursed church?